And hello fellow adventurers, thank you for tuning in today to this short video, and we'll be giving you an overview on how combat works once we moved from a exploration turn into a fight turn. As you may know already, when you're at a location and you roll the threat die and it comes up with a threat symbol, a word shall we say, what happens then is you take one of these cards and you flip it over, and it will inform you something along the lines of there is goblins to fight, and so this will be our battle. So in front of us we have a level 1 barbarian, and here we have its talent tokens at the very top, which is bravery, fight and physical, and those are the makeshift tokens that you see just above you, done by a little hole puncher. As we speak, my artist is putting together token design for this, so we have to use these for the moment as representations. Now on the back of this card it will say a barbarian starts off with a sword and dagger and 4 gold of various items. Since this is just combat only today, we've given him a dagger and a sword, and on the back of this card it says if your barbarian is not going to wear any armor in this adventure, he also gets a bonus agility token of a reroll 1, which is what you see as the 4th pale blue token. So right, let's talk about combat. So let's say we are going to fight in a level 1 dungeon 2 goblins per hero. So we need to produce 2 goblins. So as repetitive tokens we are going to use these. The M means it's a creature that fights in melee, and if you flip it over, R is for a creature that might have a ranged weapon. So these M's that you see in front of you are just tokens that will represent a final product, which will probably be some kind of creature, feature, monster, icon. So in front of us right now, the barbarian is going to fight 2 goblins, and we will be fighting those goblins in a hallway. And as we can see here, up to 2 heroes can fight 2 creatures, and 1 hero can use a ranged attack, or 1 monster with a range ability can attack. So we're in a corridor, and if we had a party of 4, obviously 2 of the heroes will have to stand back, and it will be the same for the monsters as well. So in this hallway is our barbarian with his sword and his dagger on his hip, and in front of him is going to be 2 goblins. And now our goblins have a fight of a d6. Their physical is a d6. The agility of a d6 is when you attack them or they attack you with ranged attacks, so you can try and avoid. And they have a bravery, which is a little bit of a morale thing that can be triggered with heroic actions. If a goblin was to hit you, they would roll a d8, which would represent a standard one-handed weapon of some nature. If you kill this goblin, you would roll a d6, and on a 5+, you gain 1 experience point. Once you have 10 experience points, immediately your hero can flip the card from level 1 to level 2, so you'll be able to level up as your journey goes through the dungeon. At the bottom card we've added 2 symbols. The heart-shaped symbol represents 1 health, which our barbarian on the left has 3. And we see that there is a shield symbol. Now that is like a basic defense. So this goblin here would roll a d6 physical when he's being attacked and damaged. But the lowest that d6 can be would be a 2. So even if this goblin rolled a 1, you would just bump it up to a 2. Goblins are not very strong, but they do tend to wear little bits of craggy old materials, very crude armor, maybe bits of bone, old leather, and that gives them just a little bit of safety in their cowardly fighting. We also know on the back of the card of the goblin we have some information like loot and wave 1, and it's a threat level 1 creature. There's 3 threat levels. Dragons will be level 3, of course, and that connects to the level of dungeon you're in. So just remember, the goblins will be fighting with a d6. Resisting damage would be a d6 physical, and they have 1 health and a sort of defense, which is 2, which helps with the physical roll. So we'll leave that slightly off camera. We don't need to see that, but it's going to be there anyway. So we have a dagger and we have a sword. Now, when you fight in this game, you would use your fighting dice, which for the barbarian is a d8, because we can see here he has a fighting of a d8. We know the goblin has a fighting of a d6, and we will use the grey die for the goblin. In this game, it's not like what I would call a cuckoo clock mechanic, where 2 little figures come out and take turns with their little hammers hitting a little wooden stump. I think that's a cuckoo clock I've seen. So there's no I go, you go, I go, you go. In this, combat is simultaneous, and therefore every roll you make is a life-threatening decision, and this is to represent the simultaneous action that you see in movies and this movement and flow of combat. Now, 2 things are going to happen right now. The barbarian has a ability called Charge In, which you'll see right in front of you, and it says the first fight round, if not ambushed, you get a +1 DL, which is dice level, to fight and damage rolls. So when this barbarian, for the first round of every combat, unless ambushed, when he fights monsters, instead of rolling a d8, he would roll a d10, just represent the fact that he's raging into combat. And also, whatever weapon he uses, it's going to do more damage if it hits. So if you was to charge in with a dagger, you would roll a d8 for damage, not a d6, and the sword would be a d10, not a d8. And that would be for the first round of every combat unless ambushed. Now, there's 2 goblins in this corridor. So how are we going to fight them? Well, number 1, we're not fighting 1-to-1. We are actually outnumbered. And how outnumbering works is when a hero is engaging with 1 or more monsters, and in this case it will be 2 goblins, we don't roll 2d6 for them to keep the numbers of dice down and things quite fluid. Their dice will always get bumped up to the next level. So even if we were fighting 4 skeletons, you wouldn't roll 4d6 for their each ability of fighting. You just roll a single d8 for the whole lot. But as they say, the more the merrier. So this d8 now, the lowest you can possibly roll is a 2, because there is 2 goblins. So naturally on a 1, it would get bumped up to a 2. So if you was fighting 4 skeletons, it would be a d8, minimum 4. And as you start killing those skeletons, or these goblins in this question here now, that number will go down, and you actually get some kind of sensation that you're actually winning the fight. So in this combat now, we're going to fight. It's going to be a d10 for the charge in for the barbarian, and because we have to somehow deal with 2 goblins at the simultaneous, they will get a d8 for both of them. So right on camera now, let's do a roll. And there's a shake of the camera. There we go. Let's pause that. There we go. So here we see that the goblins have rolled a 4 and we have rolled a 3. So the goblins are somehow moved to one side and avoided our attack, and one of them has somehow stabbed us. Whoops, thank God there's no one else in the party to see that we have made a bit of a klutz maneuver. So what happens now for this instance? Well, the goblins will now start to see about, can they hurt us? Now the goblins, they have a damage die of a d8, and we will keep that on screen because we know for a fact that is what sort of damage they produce. Now, our barbarian is pushing back on camera. He has a physical of a D8. So we will now grab a D8 for ourselves, which is our health. There we go. So what will happen here? Well, I want to talk to you about damage briefly. So what happens with damage is, as you can see on each card, it will say a top part and a bottom part. Now on the bottom of a part of the card, it might give you some kind of re-roll. So for instance, this dagger, if you roll that d6 when damaging and you roll a 1 or a 2, you get to re-roll it again. And there's other stats there on the dice as well. So the problem with a dagger is, if you roll a draw, and that we didn't, the dagger person will always use, because obviously you're holding a very small weapon. You also know, while we're talking now, that the sword, when you roll in the fight roll, you may re-roll a 1, and that's because a sword is a balanced, skillful weapon, allows in for parrying, rip-rosting, and stuff like that. So you can see the benefits and negatives of these two items in front of you. But as you know, we are using the sword, so let me just put that there for you, and that way we can bring the goblin in. And there we go. So we know for a fact that the goblin's going to roll a d8 and I'm going to roll a d8, and it's a roll off. And the reason why it's called a roll off is because the damage of the goblins, which is a d8, is the same as the barbarian's physical of a d8. And so what happens there is it will just be a simple roll off. If for any reason the dice for damage for your weapon is higher than the creature's physical health, and it can be the other way around, if the creature that's attacking the hero, if his damage die is going to be higher than your physical or your protection rating die of the armor, then it isn't a roll off. You just simply roll your damage, and obviously you're hoping that your hero has some form of protection, which is that minimum number, which you can see on the screen with the goblin, is a 2. If the barbarian doesn't have any armor, which has a minimum level of protection, which we have here on the symbol for the goblins, then basically you're just going to take the damage, and there is no roll, there is no defense. Skin does not hold up against the blades of the goblins. But in this, for instance, there is a roll off. So let's get my hand in under the camera and have a roll, and we see that oh yes, excellent, the barbarian's 8 is higher than the damage of the 2. So the goblin did actually cut the barbarian, but it was not a wound, because they didn't defeat the barbarian's physical. So he takes a scar, but he's still in the fight. A little bit of pain, a little drop of blood, we are okay. So now we go on to combat round number 2. The barbarian obviously loses the charge in, since it was just for the initial round of combat. And so he will be rolling a d8, which is his normal fighting ability. And the goblins, obviously being outnumbering the barbarian, will still roll their d8. And as we see here, the goblin rolls a 1, the barbarian rolls a 2, so the barbarian succeeds in hitting this goblin. Now, as I said before, the sword's damage die is a d8, and that is higher than the physical of the goblin. That means the goblin does not roll his physical die, but it still gets its defense at the bottom of the card of 2. As long as I don't roll a 1 or a 2, hey, that's a 6. That means that one goblin has now been killed, so we can remove this token to one side, and congratulations to the barbarian. And now we move into round 3. The barbarian will roll his d8, and the single goblin now will drop to a d6, which is his normal ability, because he doesn't have a friend to play with. And we rolled 2 of the same die, shame on me. Let's swap that around and roll again. Barbarian is purple. So in this, for instance, the single goblin has managed to get a blow in onto the barbarian. But at the top of the screen we have some tokens, and you will see the word FIG. That is fighting, and it says reroll 2, and this is one of the tokens that you get when you start your adventure. So reroll 2 means on a fight roll of a 1 and a 2, you'll be able to cash this token in and re-roll that die. So we're going to reach out, get rid of that token, and we are going to re-roll this die and see what happens. And we roll a 1 again. Well, that is pretty bad. But as you can see, between those two dice on the card with the sword, it says re-roll 1 on a fight roll. So we actually get now a re-roll. And it is an 8. So this now means that the barbarian, because he had the sword, managed to not only block the blow, he gets to get the blow in on the goblin. And because 8 is higher than a 7, you draw a heroic action card before you roll the damage die. And it says, great hit. Deal 1 wound guaranteed and +1 to experience roll if killed. So, the damage die for this is a D8. It gets bumped up? No, it actually just does 1 wound. So guaranteed, this guy has been killed. So an auto kill, because it's an auto wound and the goblin only has 1 wound. So then we have to say, right, the 2 goblins are laying dead at my feet. Did we get any experience from that? Well, the first goblin, we can now make a roll for its experience. So that would be a D6 and a 5+. And for the second goblin, it will be an experience roll of a 5+. But do you remember, with the great hit, we get a +1 because it was quite a good blow. Now, we should have done the experience roll as each goblin died, but I didn't do that. So let's roll for the first goblin, which is a 5+. And congratulations, you gain an experience point, which we will put here as a lovely tiddlywink. Because it was a natural 6 and the stat said loot, we also find 1 gold on that creature. Now we're going to roll for our second goblin, and we can add +1 to this roll, and +1 to a 5 is a 4. And we get a 5. So we actually get 2 experience points for 2 goblins. So if we get 10 experience points, we can flip the barbarian over. And as you can see, the first ability, which is the one that's most used on the barbarian, will be its fighting. So we cash in 10 experience points and we find out we are now checking a D10 in combat. And that would be a D12 when you first go charging in. Quite an unstoppable force, we hope. And that is what I'm going to round up with today. It's quite simple, as you can see. And let's just have a quick look at an orc, shall we? An orc has very similar stats. The main difference is they're a bit tougher with a physical of a D8. And we see that the actual defense of the creature at the very bottom with the shield symbol is now a 3. And that's mainly because orcs are much more tougher and they don't feel pain. So if we go back and do the same fight again, very briefly, let me remove these dice. There we go. Excellent. So let's just say we are going to fight a single orc. Let's just say we've come across an orc sentry in a corridor guarding a door. And the fight will start. We charge into combat. We'll be rolling a D8, upgraded to a D10. And then the orc will fight back with a D6. So let's roll those just for this one-off encounter. And you see that the barbarian has rolled a lovely 7 because of the charge. And therefore he will get also a deep thrust. Your target's physical die is lowered by 1. So before the orc can even turn around and realise what's happening, our blade has gone slicing through the chest of this orc. So this is going to be quite a high die roll. So as we know, when we charge in for the first round and we have hit, Your sword's D8 will become a D10, but because of the deep thrust, we will find out that the orc's health of a D8 drops to a D6. So if I just put those on screen for you, that would be the die roll. But as I said earlier, if your damage roll is higher than his physical roll, or should I say if your damage die is higher than his physical die, he doesn't get to roll this. He just gets the defense. So I am now going to roll a D10, and if I roll higher than a 3, the orc is killed. And we have a 5. Therefore, the orc is killed. And we just need to see if we can make some experience out of this blow. And a 2 is a no. We don't gain any experience, but charging around the corner and sticking a sword through the guts of an orc and watching him collapse to the floor and die in front of us is something that we can enjoy. And, well, that was quite simply, I think, what we've covered. We know the die rolls. We know about the tokens at the top, which can be cashed in at any time. And we now know that if the damage is equal to physical, it's a simple roll-off. And if the damage is higher than the creature's physical and the other way around for the hero, then it's going to be an auto wound. No need to actually do a physical roll, but you may have to roll the physical die if the hero may have something like a shield as well. So for instance, if the barbarian was to find some armor, let me put this here for you just now. If the barbarian had some armor, the armor's D8 protection is the same as his physical, so it's just a D8. But because you have this armor, when you roll your D8, you can't roll lower than a 3. So you're going to have a base defense of 3. So if this orc was to get a blow into me right now, he would roll a D8 and I would roll a D8, but obviously on a 1 or a 2 I bump it to a 3, so I do have a level of protection. And as you get onto heavier armor and plate armor, as well as that protection die going higher, and obviously going higher than your physical naturally, you also get a higher minimum defense as well. I think that was pretty much that. And the last thing, of course, is the good old shield, I think, before we end up. A shield does have a minimum defense also. It's also used against anyone shooting an arrow at you, so that's like a minimum roll on your agility. And finally, the good thing about a shield is on a fight draw, you win. So if I was rolling a d8 for combat and got a 5, and then if the orc got a 5, normally the weapons will clash and nobody wins. But the good news is, obviously, with a shield, with a hero, you'll be able to trump that, and obviously you will get the blow in. So shields are very good, especially for characters who are not very skilled in combat. And that is that, actually. Yeah. If there's more than the same amount of creatures as the room, so if we just put a couple of cards on screen, in this hallway, we could fight 2 orcs with 2 heroes. If, for instance, there was 3 orcs fighting me, only 2 can fight, and 1 will be just placed on this card to represent that 1 is in reserve. And as soon as an orc dies, this reserve orc will come into combat. So if you're fighting 6 orcs in this hallway, only 2 of them will be fighting the barbarian, and the other 4 are just itching to get in, and they probably do that by stepping over the dead corpses of their brothers. And also, that is it. Yes, when a fight starts, of course, you obviously divide up the monsters to which heroes wants to engage with them. So obviously the single barbarian would have to take on the 2 goblins, or the 3 orcs if you was in a different location. And the bigger the location, the more creatures that can surround you, of course, and be swamped when it comes to being outnumbered. So single heroes would like to sort of hopefully have fights in corridors and control the situation more. And if you're having more heroes, then when a fight starts, you just say, well, I'm going to take 2 orcs, can you take 1? The person with the first player token will actually get the last say in the matter. So, you know, you can sort of scoop up more of the enemies to fight yourself to try and get more experience. But at the same time, you're probably going to be outnumbered and take a chance. And then after combat, of course, hopefully you've got some experience, and then you start going back into the exploration phase and moving on into the next battle. Of course, when it comes to healing, you cannot heal naturally in a fight. There's no way you can just say to an orc, hold on, let me get my bandages out. But there will be sort of magical healing and potion healing naturally for the high fantasy side of games. But once combat is over, then obviously you can start bandaging yourself up, removing any wounds. As you can see as I move this card, the barbarian can take 3 wounds. So 3 blows in combat and the barbarian will collapse to his knees. So you've got to be careful with your combats and do them rightly. Anyway, I hope that explains that. We're coming up to the 30-minute mark now, and I think that's good enough as a chatty example. And so next video I will do a barbarian versus a couple of goblins, a couple of orcs, and then I will put in a barbarian and a dwarf, I believe, and throw some dice and see how they divide up the enemies. So fingers crossed with this limited camera angle and the way that I have to sort of get my arms around the camera to roll dice. It's quite a good experience coming up, and hopefully show the chaos and the hecticness of the simultaneous fight system and how all the weapons and the tokens and the heroic actions work. And hopefully it will give you an image of the movies and the books that you read, or the computer games, as heroes clash with monsters in various rooms without the tiles and without the miniatures. Anyway, I'll leave that with that. I hope these videos are uploaded to you shortly. I hope you're doing okay. I hope these videos are pretty okay for you. And when we do finally get to like an hour and a half playthrough, I'll make sure that we do something with this camera angle. We'll try and get some higher angle. We get the whole board and the whole table in, and maybe you can watch part 1, part 2, and watch a couple of heroes going into a dungeon, fighting monsters, gaining experience and gold, and just see how the whole dungeon experience plays out. Anyway, really appreciate if you watch this video. You guys and all, take care, and fellow adventurers, thank you very much.